So Bill asked me the other day, he said, so how do you feel about the office market? And I said, I feel a lot better if you'd hurry up and sign your lease. So glad we got that over with. And thank you guys. It's a little weird negotiating a lease with your own law firm. That's an odd dynamic. But so I'm going to talk a little bit about the office market. And so a lot of these bullet points are the same as last year, but the top one has been replaced. It said the Houston economy continues to outperform, and now we're going to talk about oil. And as Alan said, I think the office side is probably the area we're going to feel it first. The reality is there's a lot of sensitivity right around that $60 number, and I think a lot of people feel it's going to go below that and potentially stay there for a while. Saudi Arabia is playing their hand to say, look, we can impact shale plays and we can put pressure on Russia. And I think the reality is sort of how long are they going to want to play that hand? Because at some point, they do like a certain standard of living in Saudi Arabia. So we'll see how that goes. I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on the service side of the business. The reality is there's probably going to be a lot of renegotiation of contracts, and so that's going to put pressure on the service guys. CapEx budgets, you're already reading, are being cut by most of the oil companies. I think it's going to put sort of pressure on a lot of the middle market kind of marginal guys, who some of which are probably a little over leveraged and may get squeezed depending how long the price stays low. So you may even see quite a bit of M&A activity and consolidation. We have several investors who are heavily involved in the market, and for a while now they've been saying, we're just waiting because we think there are going to be a lot of good buying opportunities. So in Houston, generally the rule of thumb is 1 direct energy job equals 4 additional jobs. And so if hiring really slows, which it probably will, it will stop job growth in Houston. And for a while now we've been looking at that. You can talk about job growth, but you got to get a little more granular and say, okay, what type of jobs are those? And for the last 3 to 4 years, they've been a lot of white-collar sort of engineering and technical jobs. But we've noticed that really growth has started to shift from the west, meaning in the energy corridor, to the east, more into the blue collar, and I think that trend is going to continue. So Houston's a great place to work and live. I think some of the best things we've done for ourselves is continue to work on things like Bayou Greenways. For a long time, Houston has been a great place to come and get a job. We've not been known as a great place to live, and I know you all experience this, but someone who comes here for a job, I think is amazed at the end of the day on what a great place Houston is to live. And a lot of that has to do with the people, but I think a lot of that has to do with the investment in infrastructure and parks and things we're making. Densification and connectivity is going to become more and more important. If you sort of look at a national trend where essentially on a very simplistic basis, people have been moving out of rural areas for years into denser urban areas. That same phenomenon happens within cities. And so essentially, I think there's a merging kind of the global gateway core of Houston, and that really goes from the energy corridor to downtown. And that run of Houston right there is going to undergo significant densification. And it has big issues on the connectivity side, because I already hear from everybody that traffic is more difficult, and so as we continue to build more office, how we get people to that office is going to be very important. And in some respects, downtown is better positioned than anywhere because of its fundamental advantage of connectivity. The office worker is different. I think we all know this, those of us that run businesses. We're all competing for talent, trying to figure out what it is a 20-something wants. And we're big believers in an amenitized, differentiated work environment is incredibly important. And so we continue to focus on that. And then we're a core investment market. I think this is going to be an interesting cycle, because there was a lot of institutional money that remembered the 80s, and it took literally 20 years for that to either for those people to retire or for them to forget, one or the other. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to say, oh, here we go again for Houston. And so it's going to be interesting to sort of see how we go through this next downturn with oil. So this is a piece CBRE produces that I always like, and it's sort of the market clock and where certain office markets in Houston kind of relative to the cycle. And what happened is, if you see really on the top left-hand corner there, what I would call the sort of the significant markets, so Galleria, West Chase, Woodlands, Katy Freeway, and CBD. All of those last year were kind of just about straddling that line between rising market and peaking market. And so now they've all pushed, firmly into a peaking market. Greenway hasn't had a lot of development. It's stayed about the same. And the reality is everybody else has stayed just about in the same place. There hasn't been a significant amount of development in those other areas. A ton of development has obviously occurred in the energy corridor. So if you take those sort of what I call the global gateway markets, so CBD, Galleria, West Chase, energy corridor, that represents over 50% of the development. And of that, the energy corridor itself is 40%. So not 40% of the 50, but 40% of the total. And so you can see the 12 buildings out there, that represents the majority. And even in a great CBD market, we really only have 2 buildings being built downtown. So energy corridor has really pushed the bulk of the development in the city. So in terms of new development, last year between sort of pre-leasing, which is what we track a lot, fortunately there's not been a lot of speculative development. We were running about a little over 70%. That's dropped down to 67.9%. The thing you have to be careful with this number is if you take total construction for lease, which is really those of us building buildings to lease to tenants versus owner-occupied. If you take the 7 million owner-occupied out of the total, which is at 17 million, and then take the leased out of the total committed, so you sort of take all the owner-occupied out, that number looks more like 50% of the true for lease buildings, which is still okay. But I think the trick is, are we going to sort of calm down and say, all right, we're sort of at a point of equilibrium, and let's not get over our skis. But you can see the pre-leased and under construction, how you're starting to see a little more blue than gray, meaning less of that is pre-leased. So this is just supply and demand, and this graph makes perfect sense. It's sort of, this is going to be the cycle, and so the real question is, what does 15 and 16 look like? So from 10 really to 13, demand outstripped supply. 2013 was almost in perfect equilibrium, and then in 14 you see actually supply is starting to outstrip demand a little bit. And so equilibrium is probably around 12 to 14% vacancy, and we're sitting at 11 right now. And so we're just about there. And you've seen vacancy drop, and I think what you're going to see in 15 and 16 is potentially tick up. But the energy corridor is called the energy corridor for a reason. And so when we talk about oil, that's where it's going to have a significant impact. And what I showed you was under construction. What I didn't talk about was proposed. And so in addition to what's under construction, there are 16 deals that equal 8 million square feet proposed. And so that's the big question mark is, of those buildings, which, if any, are going to get built. And most of the development that's occurred out in the energy corridor to date has been quickly leased up by big blocks. So it's been ConocoPhillips taking big blocks, and so these are 200,000 to 500,000 square foot leases. I think the reality is the big block leasing is probably done. So it's a totally different dynamic if you're going to go out and build a 400,000 square foot building, if reality is you're going to lease that at 25,000 square feet at a time. So suddenly vacancy is, that building's going to sit there and it's going to take longer to absorb. I'll talk a little bit about mixed use. This is actually the ULI definition. We'll keep plugging ULI today. So a lot of people sort of ask, well, what is it? And there's a lot of different, I think, opinions as to what it is. But it really has, it requires those 3 things. So it's 3 or more significant revenue producing uses. So meaning a shopping center with a little bit of office is not really getting to the heart of what mixed use is. So it's sort of a balance of uses, and ideally 3 or more. Significant physical functional integration. So just because 3 things sit next to each other, that doesn't really get at the heart of mixed use. and then conformance to a coherent plan. And from an investment standpoint, the opportunity is really what that picture shows, and that is how do you leverage each of the uses to add value to the other? So, you know, if you have great retail amenities and say you have a great hotel, how does that add value to your office by yielding higher office rents? And same with residential and same with hotel. And so, but it's a difficult balance. And the trick is it can go the wrong way. So if you get one of those pieces wrong, it can actually detract from some of the other pieces. So it's a careful balance. The market, in terms of new mixed use, really hasn't changed, and Alan had a few of them on his slides, but there's River Oaks District, which is just about to deliver that Oliver McMillan's building. Boulevard Place, just around the corner here, has kind of partially opened, if you will, and there's more coming, and Whole Foods has been fantastic. Regent Square is under development. Hughes Landing up in the Woodlands by Howard Hughes Corporation. And then these are a couple we're doing. Top left is the expansion of City Center. So it's about 1 million square feet of multi-office and retail. So I need all the other buildings in the energy corridor not to get built so I can go build those too. Top right is actually Kirby Grove. That doesn't show the new office building, but that's the multifamily. We're incredibly excited about that. We're building it around the redevelopment of a 6-acre park that'll be on par with Discovery Green, which ought to be just an amazing amenity for sort of the upper Kirby, River Oaks, Westview area. Bottom left is our project in College Station. We are admittedly a bunch of Aggies, and we've worked on this for 7 years, believe it or not, and so we probably wouldn't have worked on it that long if we weren't Aggies. And then the bottom right is our redevelopment of the Houston Pavilion's Green Street, and you can start to see some of the interior improvements where we've completely redone the interior. We'll start construction on Hotel Alessandra early next year, which we're excited about. It'll be a 5-star hotel. We're doing that with Valencia Group, similar to how we did Hotel Sorella at City Center, and then we'll be announcing a couple new projects in the next month or so. But
tell them what the rent is over at River Oaks.
Yeah, there's some rents in River Oaks District that are up in the $180 a foot range. So that's pretty staggering, and you know you know, and I go back to my comment about connectivity. It'll be interesting to sort of see that intersection in that area and sort of how that performs. And obviously, you know, there's some amazing retail along there, but at some point you sort of say, I'm not willing to do that anymore. And so we have a lot to do on the infrastructure side in Houston, and if we don't figure out transportation, it's going to be tough. I think if you've read about it, or if you haven't, you should, but the Metro reimagining their bus program is really significant. For years, we've essentially had a system that was a hub and spoke where, you know, if you needed to get from point A to point B, you had to come in and then go out. And the reality is the route times were very inefficient, very confusing. And the routes were essentially grown by people calling and say, I'd like you to come, you know, to where I am. And if you really analyzed it, there was absolutely, you know, no merit in expanding that route. So what Metro's doing is going to a grid system now, which absolutely makes sense, that, you know, instead of trying to figure out you're on bus 3, 6, 7, 9 going to who knows where, that if I want to go down Richmond, I get on the Richmond bus. You know, that would seem pretty straightforward. So, so it'll be a much more grid system, so you can go east, west, north, south, and I think that will have a big impact. So thank you.